Some heroes don't fall in battle, they're buried under silence. He was badge number 729, elite, obedient, designed for war, trained for loyalty. Until one mission went wrong, the humans fled. He stayed, and the silence grew teeth. But fate doesn't forget so easily. Years later, a whimper echoed through the trees. A boy, lost, hunted. The soldier in him stirred. This wasn't a mission. It was something older, something deeper. What do you do when you're no longer a weapon but still know how to protect? What happens when you meet someone who needs saving, just like you? What follows is a journey, a broken dog, a frightened child, and a forest where the past waits like a trap and the future like a promise. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a honeyed glow over the endless stretch of wild grass that swayed like ocean waves. Each blade shimmered, whispering secrets to the wind, but no one answered. Not the birds, not the trees, and certainly not the trembling, dust-covered creature dragging his tiny paws through the silence. He was so small he could barely be seen above the brush. His coat, a patchy mixture of soft brown and sable black, was still more fluff than fur, not yet hardened by the world. His name, if he ever had one, was gone, forgotten, like a dream chased away by morning light. Only the scent of something long lost clung faintly to his skin, the ghost of human hands, the memory of a heartbeat beside his own. His legs quivered with each step. He hadn't eaten since he couldn't remember. The only thing he knew was that he had awoken alone, belly tight with hunger, throat dry, body cold despite the golden warmth around him. The field was too quiet. There were no buzzing insects, no chirping birds, just a stillness that felt like the breath before something breaks. A gust of wind rushed past him. The grass rustled, and for a moment he thought he saw something move between the blades. But when he turned, nothing was there, only shadows stretching long across the earth. His ears, still floppy with youth, twitched at the sound of nothingness. He tried to bark, just once. Maybe someone would hear him. Maybe something kind would come. But all that came out was a dry, pitiful yip-half cry, half cough. And still, nothing answered. The pup, small, lost, and named only by the silence, took another step forward, then another. Dust rose around his tiny paws. His pads, tender and pink, ached with each touch of the earth. His tail curled instinctively under his belly, a reflex he didn't understand, but felt natural, like fear lived there, coiled and quiet. He paused beside a patch of broken ground where the grass gave way to scorched dirt, cracked by sun and age. He sat, or rather collapsed, his legs no longer willing to carry him. His chest rose and fell rapidly. Every breath felt borrowed. The world around him was beautiful, golden, open, vast. But in that moment, it became a prison, the kind without walls, but full of waiting things. That was when he noticed the sky. At first, it was just a flicker, like a cloud breaking apart too suddenly. Then the flicker turned to shape, and the shape turned to movement. Dark, fluid, calculated. He blinked, squinting up. 1 crow, then 3, then 12. Their black wings cut through the sunlight like knives. They circled above him in slow, deliberate spirals, the kind of motion that doesn't chase, the kind that waits. The pup stood up slowly, unsteadily, craning his neck as he watched them. His body didn't understand what he was seeing, but something ancient inside him, something buried deep in his blood, shuddered. The crows began to descend, not all at once, not in chaos, but with frightening purpose. One landed 20 feet away, then another, closer, then two more, evenly spaced, surrounding him like shadows that had forgotten how to stay flat on the ground. They didn't caw. They didn't screech. They simply watched. Their eyes gleamed like polished stones, cold, calculating, alive in a way that meant harm. The pup took a shaky step backward. One of the birds mirrored him, hopping forward, talons clicking softly on the dry earth. He whimpered. Still, no one answered. The circle tightened, and somewhere far off, beyond the field, beyond the trees, beyond the edge of anything he could see, a breeze died. Then silence. Utter, bone-deep silence. He crouched, pressing his belly to the ground. The grass no longer hid him. It only made it harder to move. He tried to growl, but it came out a whisper. A crow took flight suddenly, then swooped down, its wings slicing the air above his head. He yelped, stumbled sideways, and another landed just inches away. They were testing him. The pup's breathing became ragged. His limbs refused to move. His vision blurred. He could smell them now, metallic, earthy, feathers soaked in old wind and death. He shut his eyes. Something sharp grazed the tip of his ear, and then the ground shook. Not a tremor, not wind. A quake, a thud, then another, then a sound like thunder cracking against the skin of the world, a snarl deep and primal, shaking every blade of grass into submission. The pup opened his eyes just in time to see a blur of muscle, fur, and fury descend from the trees like a summoned storm. The crows screamed, but it was too late. The beast had arrived, and the field of no name would never be the same again. The air had thickened. It wasn't just heat anymore. It was pressure, invisible, heavy, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The golden light that once danced on the field now felt distant, washed out like it too was retreating. Above, the crows circled lower. There were more now. Dozens. Their black wings sliced through the light, stealing pieces of the sun as they turned. Shadows twisted and multiplied across the grass, falling over the pup's back like a net tightening slowly. Riven didn't move. He couldn't. His small frame pressed into the earth, hoping without knowing why, that if he made himself smaller, the sky might forget him. But the sky did not forget. The first crow landed with a soft thud just a few paces ahead. Its talons sank into the dry soil. Head tilted, it stared not with curiosity, but with intent. Then came the second, and a third, a fourth behind him. They weren't chaotic, as birds should be. They were deliberate. They positioned themselves like sentinels, like hunters. The grass swayed once, then stilled, and in that breathless hush, Riven felt it, not with thought, not with language, but deep in the marrow of his tiny bones. This was wrong. Everything inside him screamed to run. But where? Every direction held black wings and sharp beaks. He whimpered, a sound so faint it was swallowed by the wind before it reached his own ears. One of the crows took a single hop forward. Another opened its wings in a threatening arc, feathers glossy, eyes flat and cold like glass marbles. Its beak clicked softly, a sound like bone on stone. Riven's ears dropped. His tail curled tighter under him. His body trembled, not from the breeze but from something deeper, primal, and ancient. He didn't understand fear. Not fully, but he felt it. And it was louder than anything he'd ever known. A crow behind him let out a guttural caw, low and raspy, and the others answered not with noise but motion. They crept in, closing the space between breath and bite. One fluttered its wings once, a warning. Another scraped its talons across the earth, testing it, feeling the soft give of soil where small bones might soon lie. Then silence again, a silence so thick it pressed into his ears like water. And then the sky broke. One crow dove, fast, direct. A black arrow launched from the clouds, its wings tucked, its claws aimed. Riven flinched, too slow. The bird missed his face by inches, its feathers grazing his ear as it passed with a blast of air. He yelped, stumbled sideways, and that was all it took. They attacked, all at once. The air exploded into movement wings, beating like war drums, feathers slicing through space, beaks snapping with hollow clicks. The sky became a blur of black, a storm of shadow and shriek. One latched onto his back, claws raking through his fur. He screamed, twisting violently, and managed to throw it off, but not before pain bloomed across his shoulder. Another crow struck his flank. Another dived toward his face. He rolled, dodging just in time, only to find himself eye to eye with a crow already landing. He snapped his jaws in desperation, catching nothing but air. Feathers filled his mouth. He was drowning in them. The world became noise, rustling wings, sharp cries, the wet thud of claws on flesh. A beak sliced across his hind leg shallow, but enough to make him stumble. Blood mixed with dirt. Terror mixed with instinct. He tried to run. They cut him off. Again and again they herded him in a tight circle, corralling him like prey. Every direction they were there, wings spread, beaks gleaming, hungry. Riven's breath came in short, panicked bursts. His paws scrabbled against the ground. His heart pounded like it wanted to escape through his ribs. Another crow lunged for his eye. He fell. And as the shadow grew above him, dark wings blotting out what little sun remained, something inside Riven gave way. Not fear, not fight, something else. Surrender. He shut his eyes, and the world for just one heartbeat slowed. But the blow never came. Instead, a sound split the field. Not a scream, not a bark, a roar. Deep, violent, unnatural. It came not from the sky, but from the earth, from the very soil beneath him. The crows shrieked in panic. Wings flapped wildly above his head, scattering dust and feathers. Something massive moved through them, tearing the air apart with every motion. The pup opened his eyes just in time to see a wall of dark fur and rage crash through the murder of crows like a bolt of lightning. He didn't see teeth, just the glint of them. Didn't hear words, only the wet crack of impact and the furious beating of wings trying to flee. A crow was slammed into the ground with a yelp and a flutter, then thrown aside. Others fled upward, screeching, clawing at the sky as if trying to rip a hole in it to escape. In the chaos, Riven lay frozen, mud-slicked, trembling, eyes wide. Feathers rained around him like burnt snow. And then, through the fading storm, a shape emerged, towering, broad, silent. A German shepherd twice the size of anything Riven had ever imagined, chest heaving, jaws still wet, coat dark like storm-soaked soil, streaked with old scars. His eyes burned not red, not wild, amber. The beast stood between Riven and the sky, and for the first time the sky looked away. The storm had passed, but not the kind that came from clouds. The real storm stood in the middle of the ruined field, its chest heaving, breath rising in hot clouds from flared nostrils. Each exhale stirred the dust and feathers that still floated in the air like ash after a fire. The sun tried to pour through again, but the presence of the beast seemed to hold back even light itself. He was massive, at least to Riven's terrified eyes. A German shepherd, but not the kind raised for parks and backyards. No, this one was something else. Worn, hardened. His body was muscle-wrapped in shadow, thick fur streaked with gray, and the ragged edges of old scars. Some healed, some reopened in fresh crimson from the battle just moments before. There was a chunk missing from one ear. His right hind leg bore the faint trace of an old fracture that had never quite healed right. But none of that made him look weak. It made him look immortal. His presence devoured space, claimed it. The grass no longer swayed near him. The air itself seemed to hold its breath again, but this time in reverence. The last of the crows were gone. Not even a feather dared remain too long in his shadow. Riven lay low to the earth, still stunned, still trying to understand what had happened. His body trembled not from the cold now, but from the sheer energy that had burst into the world like a hammer to glass. He didn't dare move, didn't dare speak. And then the shepherd turned. The motion was slow, deliberate-like, someone who had spent his whole life calculating the consequences of every move. His paws shifted with silent power, leaving dents in the dirt where he stepped. When his gaze found Riven, it was like being struck by the sun through stained glass, warm and fierce, beautiful and unrelenting. Amber eyes, deep and ancient. Not just the eyes of a dog, but of something older, something that had seen things it didn't speak of. Riven blinked once. The shepherd didn't. He just stared, not with judgment, not with kindness either, but with something heavier, assessment. It was the way soldiers look at the battlefield, the way ghosts look at the living, the way fathers look at sons they never expected. Riven's throat tightened. In that silence the wind began to return. A low breeze brushed against his face, drying the blood at the edge of his fur. Around them, the golden field stood still, no longer a trap, but a place of aftermath. The shepherd stepped forward. Riven flinched. The movement was so slight it could have been missed, but it was enough. The shepherd stopped, tilted his head. Then, with a grunt so low it felt like a distant drumbeat, he turned his back on the pup and walked away. No command, no gesture. Just a step, then another, leaving behind the silence as if it had never mattered. Riven lay there, stunned, alone again. His body told him to stay, to curl tighter, to breathe shallow and hope for rest. But something deeper, something awakened in the chaos, told him to move. So he did, slowly, painfully. His legs shook, but they obeyed. He took a step, then another. The field still smelled of crow feathers and scorched air, but the shepherd's scent lingered too faint, musky, grounding. Riven followed it, not out of fear, not out of instinct, out of something unnamed, a pull, a thread. As he crossed the battered field, his eyes never left the path where the stranger had gone. He didn't know who that dog was. He didn't know why he had come, why he had fought for a pup he didn't know, why he had spared not just his life but his dignity. But as he limped forward, the blood drying on his fur, the pain settling into his limbs, Riven knew one thing with sudden, absolute clarity. He couldn't stay here. The field wasn't safe. And the beast with amber eyes, who walked like a shadow and struck like a storm, was the only thing in this world that had shown him what safety felt like, even if only for a breath, even if only for a battle. So Riven followed the footsteps in the grass, faint, wide, and steady, not knowing where they led, only that they were the first real thing his heart had trusted in days. Kyle didn't look back. He didn't have to. His paws moved through the tall grass with the confidence of something that had lived long enough to know what paths were safe and which ones were death in disguise. Every step he took pressed certainty into the earth, each movement purposeful, controlled. The wind picked up behind him, scattering the last of the feathers across the field like broken promises. Riven stood there, caught between two worlds. The one behind him, blood-scented, claw-torn, echoing with the flap of wings and the weight of fear. And the one ahead, silent, dark, uncertain, but with a presence that had faced the sky and made it flee. Kyle didn't call him, didn't wait, but something about the way his body moved, as if expecting Riven to follow, not demanding it, made the decision feel like Riven's own. The pup hesitated, his tiny chest still heaving. His fur was matted in places where claws had found flesh. His legs throbbed with every heartbeat, and yet he moved. First one step, then another. Then he was following. The field faded behind them. Grass gave way to roots, to stone, to dirt paths worn thin by creatures older than time. The air changed, no longer warm, no longer open. The forest swallowed them in one long breath. The trees stretched upward like ancient sentinels, their limbs tangled in whispers. Shafts of dying sunlight filtered through in broken pieces, painting golden scars across the forest floor. Riven walked in and out of light, his tiny shadow struggling to keep up with Kyle's larger silhouette. They didn't speak. There were no words for this kind of moment, this silent tether between two souls, neither of whom had asked for the other, but who now walked the same line. Kyle's body moved like memory fluid, quiet, a rhythm of survival etched into his bones. His ears flicked to every sound, a branch cracking, a hawk crying far above, the rustle of something unseen in the underbrush. And yet he never once showed fear, only readiness. Riven, on the other hand, stumbled over almost everything. His paws weren't used to the uneven ground. A root caught his toe, a vine brushed his face and made him flinch. He tried to keep up, but the distance between them stretched wider with each misstep. Still, he didn't stop, because with every yard he crossed, he felt something shift. The field hadn't just been left behind, it had been shed, like a skin that no longer fit. The forest wasn't home, but it wasn't emptiness either. It was something in between. Kyle reached a small rise in the trail and paused, just enough for Riven to catch up. Not a full stop, not concern, but maybe, just maybe, a sign. Riven didn't say thank you. He didn't even know how. Instead, he climbed beside the older dog, panting, legs shaking. The view from the ridge opened briefly. A river in the distance, cutting through the woods like silver glass. Smoke curled faintly on the horizon, so faint it might have been a trick of the air. The wind shifted again, cooler this time, carrying the scent of pine, water, and something else, ash or memory. Kale took it in, then turned without a word, heading downhill. Riven followed. The trees thickened, the trail narrowed. Night crept closer with every step, pooling in the corners of the forest like ink spilled from the sky. Birds no longer called. Insects went quiet. It was the kind of stillness that didn't feel peaceful, just alert. But even here, Kyle didn't hesitate. He ducked under branches. He stepped over thorns. He moved as though he had memorized every root and stone. Riven tried to mimic him, When Kael bent low, Riven crouched. When Kael halted mid-step at the sound of snapping twigs, Riven froze, holding his breath until Kael moved again. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something adjacent. A learning. A listening. By the time the last rays of sunlight finally bled out through the trees, the pup's body was aching. His paws were cracked. His fur was stiff with dried blood and dirt. His ears hung low, no longer twitching, too tired to care. But he was still walking. And Kael, though he never turned his head, knew the pup had kept up, knew he hadn't cried, knew he was still there. At one point, a single leaf fell from the canopy above and landed softly on Riven's back. He didn't notice. But Kael did. He glanced just once over his shoulder. And in that glance, Riven saw something. Not approval, not affection, but recognition. Of what? He didn't know. Yet something deep in his chest, buried under fear and fatigue, warmed. Just a little. They kept walking. No words. No names. Just the sound of two sets of paws. One large, one small, moving through the dusk like shadows with nowhere else to go. And somewhere ahead, barely visible through the darkening woods, a flicker of firelight waited. The fire was real. Riven had smelled it long before he saw it. Thin tendrils of wood smoke curling through the trees, warm and sharp and strangely calming. It lured him forward like a distant memory, though he had no memories that warm, only instincts, and they told him fire meant someone. Fire meant shelter. Fire meant not being alone. They emerged from the trees just as the last thread of dusk unraveled from the sky. The cabin stood crooked at the base of a knoll, wrapped in the quiet hush of forest breath. Time had carved deep lines into its wooden frame. Moss clung to the roof like forgotten hair. One shutter hung askew, and the door barely held to its hinges. It wasn't a home, it was a remnant. A ghost of what once might have been a place to belong. But inside, firelight flickered. Kael approached first, always first, as if his body had long ago accepted that safety was a thing you built, not waited for. He stepped through the half-open door without ceremony. Riven paused at the threshold. Inside, shadows danced against old timber walls. The fire burned low in a stone hearth, flames licking gently at the logs. A metal bowl sat near the center of the room, filled with what looked like leftover stew or kibble soaked in something warm. Near it, a pile of straw had been flattened into a sort of nest, covered by a threadbare blanket with edges chewed and frayed. It wasn't much, but it didn't feel like nothing. Kael didn't speak at first. He just looked back once, his amber eyes catching the firelight, two coals in a storm-weathered face. Then came the voice, low and coarse like gravel smoothed by rain. Eat, rest. 2 words, but they cracked something open. Riven stepped inside. His paws sank into dirt floor layered with old leaves and pine needles. The warmth of the fire brushed his face. He inched toward the bowl, sniffing cautiously. His body wanted to devour everything, but his fear held him back. Hunger and suspicion wrestled inside him. Kael didn't move. He simply stood there, watching, not threatening, not kind, just watching. Finally, Riven dipped his head and began to eat. Not ravenously, not with joy, just the quiet kind of hunger that came from too many days of not knowing if there would ever be a next meal. Each bite seemed to settle something inside him. Each chew reminded him he was still alive. When he finished, Kael was already lying down near the door, his body turned slightly away, not fully, but enough to say, "I am here, but I am not yours, not yet." Riven didn't know what to do with the space that remained. He circled the straw pile once, twice. His muscles still trembled from the walk. His eyes ached. The firelight blinked in and out with every breath of the cabin. He finally curled into a ball, nose tucked beneath his tail. The blanket smelled like smoke and salt, and something older than either, something like pain that had settled in long enough to become part of the wood. Kyle hadn't moved. Only his eyes remained open, steady, unmoved. Riven closed his own slowly. His body, young and tired, surrendered faster than his thoughts. But before the dark took him completely, he whispered, not out loud, but somewhere deep in the silence that stretched between them. Why? He didn't expect an answer, and none came, only the crackle of fire, the rustle of wind through the cracked window pane, and the sound of two breaths, one small, one steady finding rhythm in the stillness. In the morning, the world would be no less uncertain. But tonight, in this derelict cabin held together by moss, smoke, and something like mercy, Riven would sleep, and Kale would watch. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the cabin walls, monsters with soft edges that danced and curled into themselves, never quite brave enough to stay still. Riven lay curled on the pile of straw, tail wrapped tightly around his body, nose pressed into the rough fabric of the blanket. His belly was full for the first time in days, and the air was warmer than any night he could remember. But sleep would not come, not truly. His eyes opened and closed in slow, uncertain rhythm. Each time they shut, something stirred behind them. Echoes of the field, the flurry of feathers, the sharp pierce of beaks, and the way the sky had seemed to collapse under the weight of black wings. He would twitch, whimper quietly, then force himself still again. Kale lay on the far side of the room by the door, a mountain of fur and scar tissue turned into shadow. He hadn't moved in what felt like hours. His body breathed like it belonged to stone. Only the occasional flick of an ear betrayed the truth he was listening to everything. Riven shifted, just slightly, and the straw crunched beneath him. His voice, when it came, was so soft it almost vanished before it reached the air. "Are you going to leave me?" Silence. The fire cracked. Wind groaned across the roof's warped beams. Riven stared at the flicker of flame, suddenly ashamed of the question. He hadn't meant to speak, not really. It had just slipped through too small, too afraid, too honest to stay hidden. His body tensed, expecting the silence to stretch, to harden. Then, from the shadows, no. A single word, low, certain, said without turning, without hesitation, without weighty explanations or sentiment. But it broke something inside, Riven softly, like the ice of fear finally melting around a heart too small for this much hope. No, it was not a promise of forever. It was not a vow of love. It was something better. Now. Kyle wasn't going to leave now. For a creature who had only ever known the shape of absence, that was everything. Riven exhaled. His body, tense for days, weeks, perhaps began to loosen. It was strange how heavy his limbs suddenly felt, as if the simple truth of safety carried weight. And now that weight had finally been allowed to rest, he turned toward the fire, not away from the world this time, but toward its warmth. The orange glow swam across the floor like a protective river. Beyond it, Kael was only a silhouette. But Riven didn't need to see his face. He knew. The older dog would not leave him tonight. He did not need to ask again. The air grew quieter, deeper. The kind of quiet that doesn't just happen, but is allowed to happen. The kind that lives in places where there are no teeth to fear in the dark, only breathing, only presence. Riven's eyes finally closed fully, without flicker or twitch, and for the first time in his short life, the dreams did not hurt. No talons, no fields, no black sky. Only warmth, and the vague scent of pine smoke, and the echo of one word anchored in his chest like a shield. No. The morning light broke sluggishly, as if reluctant to climb over the tree line. The air was thick with a quiet that didn't feel safe. Not like the silence inside the cabin, where firelight hummed and breathing held meaning. This was a different kind of silence, weighted, watchful, ancient. Kael stood at the open doorway, body still as stone, his nose twitching gently against the wind. His ears pricked, then flattened slightly, then turned back. Riven stirred behind him, still curled in the nest of straw, warm from sleep and trust. The pup blinked at the older dog, then stretched a soft, clumsy movement that knocked over the edge of the food bowl. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Kael didn't turn. The wind shifted again. A low growl formed in the older dog's throat. Not out of aggression, but recognition. Something was coming. Not something with teeth or wings. Something bigger. The kind of thing the earth feels before it breaks. Riven padded over, blinking the last of the dream from his eyes. "What is it?" he asked, voice light with sleep. Kael finally looked down at him, amber eyes like embers that never quite go out. His answer came in a word that meant nothing to the pup, but carried weight like thunder itself. "Tempet." Riven tilted his head. "Pet?" Kael didn't explain. Instead, he turned back to the forest, eyes tracing the skyline where the clouds were gathering. Not fast, not dramatic, just inevitable. The wind pressed harder now, no longer carrying birdsong, just the scent of something primal, wet soil, cracked bark, and the faint taste of metal on the tongue. Riven wrinkled his nose. He didn't know the name for it, but it felt like the sky was holding its breath too long. Kael moved fast. His muscles tensed beneath old scars as he crossed to the back of the cabin and pawed open a rotting crate hidden beneath moss and straw. Inside, a ragged satchel, cloth-wrapped bundles, something that might have once been part of a harness. Riven watched silently, ears dipping as the air grew heavier. "What are you doing?" he asked, unsure if he should help. Kael didn't answer, not with words. He dropped one of the wrapped bundles near the door and motioned with his snout toward it. "Carry," he said. A command, not a request. Riven sniffed the bundle. It smelled like old leather, earth, and kale. He lifted it awkwardly in his mouth, too big, too heavy, but he didn't let go. Kael turned, already moving, already disappearing into the trees. Riven stumbled after him. Branches reached like claws. Leaves whispered warnings. The sky groaned, low and distant. The smell of thunder crept into every breath, an ancient scent that lived in the bones, not the nose. Kael didn't look back, but his pace wasn't fast enough to lose the pup, only fast enough to teach him something. You move when the earth warns you, not when you understand. And so They vanished into the forest, two shadows threaded together by instinct and something older than words. The storm was coming, and Kael had smelled it first. The sky tore open with a roar. Rain didn't fall, it collapsed. Sheets of water slammed through the canopy like shattered glass, drowning the forest floor in moments. The earth turned to mud. Leaves curled in on themselves. Shadows bled together into something feral. Kael moved like he'd done this before, low to the ground, head forward, ears scanning. Riven tried to copy him. Bundle still clutched awkwardly in his mouth, soaked and slipping. His tiny paws skidded with every step, but he refused to fall behind. Not now, not after everything Kael had shown him. The wind howled louder, then stopped. Dead silence. It lasted a heartbeat. Then came the yips. Sharp, close, multiply. Kael froze. From the thicket to their left, eyes appeared, low to the ground, yellow, shifting. Coyotes, 3, 4, maybe more, hungry, wet, desperate. Their coats were mangy, ribs visible through fur, hunger sharpening every line. They didn't move like a pack with a plan. They moved like ghosts with nothing left to lose. One stepped forward, mouth open in a silent snarl. Kael dropped the satchel. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He lunged. The air exploded. Mud and fur and teeth spun in a blur. Kael met the first coyote mid-air, jaws locking onto its shoulder with a crack that cut through the thunder. Another leapt for his flank. Kael rolled, dragging both down, his body a whirlwind of muscle and scar. Riven froze eyes wide, chest heaving. The bundle fell from his mouth. Then a coyote broke from the left, smaller. Faster! Its eyes locked on Riven. It ran. Riven blinked, legs stiff. His instincts screamed, but his body wouldn't move. Run! Now! The coyote leapt, teeth flashing like broken glass. Riven dropped. The world slowed. Rain blurred the sky. The sound became a low hum. He rolled, clumsy but just far enough. The coyote's jaws snapped shut on empty air. Mud exploded as Riven scrambled backwards, slipping, heart hammering. The coyote snarled, circled again. "Kael!" He didn't know if he said it or thought it, but Kael heard. From the chaos, the beast with amber eyes broke free. Mud-coated, bleeding, furious. With a roar more beast than bark, he barreled into the smaller coyote. The impact lifted it clean off its feet. Kael didn't hesitate. He bit deep, shook once. Then silence. The remaining coyotes scattered into the trees. No order, no pride, just fear. Only the rain dared stay. Kael stood over the limp body for a moment, panting hard. Blood mingled with water on his coat. Then, slowly, he turned. His eyes found Riven shivering, caked in mud, still alive. Kael said nothing, but he stepped closer. Nudged the pup gently with his muzzle. Not to scold, just to say, "Move." Riven stood. His legs trembled. His heart didn't know what rhythm to follow. But he stood. They left the bodies behind. No trophies, no words, just two shadows, one scarred, one shaking, slipping deeper into the wet woods. The storm wasn't over. But the coyotes had learned. Some things in the forest do not run. The storm was a memory now, retreating into the distance like a rage that had burned itself out. Only the soft patter of residual rain remained, dripping from branches, rolling down leaves in slow, exhausted beads. Kael limped ahead, not from weakness, but from the toll of necessity. Blood marked his side, a sharp slash across the ribs, not deep enough to kill, just enough to remind. Riven trailed behind, half a pace slower than usual. His legs ached. His body trembled, but his eyes were different now. No longer just wide with fear, they held something else, something raw and new. A crack in the shell, a spark. Cale stopped under a cedar tree heavy with moisture. He turned, amber eyes locking onto the pups. "You didn't freeze." The words dropped like stone into still water. Riven blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. Cale never praised, never spoke unless necessary. But there it was, a sentence, a truth. I tried to run," Riven stammered. Cale tilted his head, a scar near his left eye twitching ever so slightly. "But you moved." He sat down slowly, deliberately. The blood on his flank had dried into a dark patch. Rain had washed the worst of it, but the wound still whispered. Riven approached carefully, then hesitated. Cale didn't look at him as he spoke again. "The first fight is never clean. It's not about winning. It's about not stopping." Riven sat, tail curled close, ears still drooped with the weight of fear, but his chest lifted a little. "I thought I was going to die." Cale let out a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. "You will. Someday. So will I. But not today." The forest around them exhaled, damp and bruised. For a long moment neither spoke. Riven glanced at Cale's wound. "You're hurt." Cale finally looked at him again, something unreadable in his stare. "It happens? Will it get infected?" Cale didn't answer right away. Then, with a grunt, he pulled himself to his feet and walked toward a fallen log overgrown with moss. He nudged it aside with a paw. Underneath, crushed pine needles, dirt, and a small bundle of dried herbs. Cale bit off a few leaves, chewed, then pressed the paste into his side with calculated precision. Riven watched, mesmerized. "You knew that was there?" Cale nodded once. "Did someone teach you that?" Cale's pause stretched long enough to be felt. "Once." The wind stirred, carrying with it the scent of wet bark and old things forgotten. Riven scooted closer, paws nearly touching Cale's. "Will you teach me?" he whispered. Cale didn't move, didn't speak, but he didn't say no. Riven lay down then, still shaking. But no longer from fear. Something quieter trembled inside him now, like the beginning of trust, like a seed cracking in dark soil. His small body curled near Cale's side, not touching, not yet, but close enough to feel his warmth. His protector, his teacher, his beast with amber eyes. And in that silent space between heartbeats, Riven felt it. A flicker, pride. By morning, the storm had become a memory tucked behind the hills, its echo lingering only in puddles and the scent of wet moss. The forest, soaked and trembling, awoke under a veil of mist. Damp leaves whispered under paw, and every breath that left Riven's small lungs curled into white ribbons in the cold morning air. His stomach growled, not the soft, whiny kind of hunger he knew before, but the sharp, scraping ache of emptiness, the kind that hollowed his chest and turned his legs into thread. Cale moved ahead, slow but steady. Every step was precise. He didn't speak. He rarely did. But Riven had started learning to read the pauses in Cale's gait, the angle of his ears, the tilt of his head. Language wasn't always spoken. The path curved near an ancient oak, its bark gnarled like knuckles and its roots erupting from the earth like veins. Kyle stopped. He sniffed the ground. Once, twice. Then, without warning, he turned sharply and padded around the base of the tree. Riven followed, ears twitching, too hungry to question, and there it was, a rabbit, its body still warm, neck broken clean. No blood, no gore, just a stillness, soft and sudden, nestled beneath the fallen leaves, as if it had simply laid down and vanished. Kyle stepped aside. "For you," he said. Riven froze. He stared at the rabbit, as if it might leap up again and vanish into the mist, then looked at Kyle. You hunted that?" Kyle didn't answer. The silence between them grew heavy. "Eat," Kyle said, voice low, firm. Riven took a hesitant step forward. The smell of the rabbit hit him, wild, raw, metallic, his stomach twisted with need and nausea all at once. "I've never eaten like this," Riven mumbled. Kale said nothing, just watched. The wind moved the mist like ghosts drifting between trees. Somewhere in the distance a crow cawed once, then silence again. Riven lowered his head. His first bite was awkward, hesitant. The skin tugged, fur got between his teeth. He flinched. But he bit again, and then something ancient in his bones remembered. The second bite was easier. The third, desperate. He chewed with small, trembling jaws. Cold meat. Warm core. The coppery tang flooded his tongue, and with it came something else, strength. Not comfort, not satisfaction, but a primal relief, like fire catching kindling. When he looked up, Kyle was still there, still watching. "You killed it for me?" Riven asked softly. Kale's head dipped slightly. "You need to live. I thought you didn't care." Kale didn't blink. "Caring wastes energy, but I protect what's mine." Riven's breath caught. A strange warmth bloomed under his ribs, something heavier than hunger, the weight of belonging. He curled beside the half-eaten rabbit, licking his lips, unsure whether to cry or curl into sleep. Kale finally turned and walked toward a sun-dappled patch of earth, then lay down with the slow precision of an old soldier, easing into vigil. Riven watched him for a long while. The amber eyes didn't close. The wind caught Kyle's fur, revealing the pattern of scars across his flank like a map etched in pain. Finally, Riven spoke again, voice quiet, afraid to shatter the moment. "Will I have to do that someday?" Kale didn't move, but his voice came, low and certain. "Yes." Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things unspoken, of lessons bleeding between teeth, of wild things passed from beast to beast. It was the first morning of something old and brutal and real. And Riven wasn't just hungry anymore. He was changing. The sun climbed slowly that morning, pushing pale fingers of light through the trembling branches. Mist clung low along the forest floor, blurring the edges of everything like the memory of a dream half remembered. Somewhere nearby, the faint trickle of a creek broke the silence like a whisper. Kale moved like a shadow, low, patient, barely stirring the ground beneath him. Riven crouched a few feet behind, mimicking the posture as best he could. His tail brushed a fern, and the leaves shivered. Kale paused. His ears swiveled back, but he said nothing. Lesson 1. Silence. They were hunting, or rather, he was being taught. Kael had led him to this stretch of underbrush after sunrise, wordless as always. He'd only looked once over his shoulder and said, "Watch, then do." Now Kael's body stiffened, amber eyes narrowing. Through a narrow slit in the brush, Riven saw it. A small hare, ears twitching, nose flickering as it nibbled at the roots of a plant. Kael moved forward, slow and exact. Each paw seemed to float an inch above the forest floor before touching down again. He was part of the land, not an invader, but something born from the dirt and shadows. Riven held his breath. Kael stopped, then turned his head slightly. A signal. Your turn. Riven's heart hammered. His mouth was dry. His legs tingled. He took one step. A leaf cracked under his paw. The hare's head jerked up, ears stiff. Riven froze. One more step, and the rabbit bolted, vanishing in a blur of white and gray. The underbrush settled in its wake. The hunt was over. Riven's ears flattened. I scared it," he whispered, voice almost swallowed by the trees. Kael rose slowly, his gaze calm but unreadable. "You moved too fast," he said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Riven blinked. He expected coldness, criticism. But Kael stepped toward him, not close enough to touch, but close enough to share breath. "You saw it," Kael said. "You waited. You didn't bark. You didn't run. I failed. You tried." A pause. "And you learned." That one word stuck in Riven's ribs like a spark trying to become flame. The wind shifted. A few dry leaves rolled past. Riven sat down slowly, heart still pounding. "I wanted to do it right," he said. "You will," Kael replied. "Someday." Silence returned. But it was no longer a punishment. They stood in it together. After a moment, Kael turned and began walking again, not back toward the cabin, but deeper into the woods. Riven followed, not out of obedience, but out of something warmer, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't have the kill, but he had something else. He had hope. The fire had burned low, only coals now, breathing faint orange beneath the driftwood bones. Outside, the forest sighed, not loud, not hostile, just a long, slow exhale like it, too, was settling down to sleep. The stars above blinked through broken clouds, soft pinpricks of light watching from a cold, immeasurable distance. Riven curled beside the hearth, a blanket draped over his shoulders. His legs still ached from the chase earlier. Not from running, but from learning how to not run, how to stalk, how to fail without fear. Kael sat nearby, near the edge of the dark, just past the ring of firelight. He always sat like that on the threshold between warmth and shadow, like he couldn't choose which world belonged to him. The silence between them had become familiar now, not empty, not tense, just shared, like a space carved out of noise where two lost things could simply be. Riven shifted, pulled the blanket tighter, then looked up, voice barely a whisper. "What's your name?" Kael didn't move at first. The wind moved instead, stirring the trees, rustling the edges of the cabin roof, slipping through the cracked shutters like a memory trying to get in. For a long moment, Riven thought the question would go unanswered. Then Kael's voice came. Low, rough, not unwilling, just rarely used. "I was once called Kael." The way he said it made something stir in Riven's chest. "Once?" Kael didn't answer that. He looked into the fire instead, as if it could rewind time. His amber eyes, normally sharp as broken glass, turned distant. not softer, just older, as if they'd seen things that didn't belong in the waking world. Cale, Riven repeated, testing the name. It sounds strong, Cale huffed. It wasn't a laugh, but it wasn't scorn either. It was never meant to be soft. Riven sat up slightly. Was it given to you, or did you choose it? Cale's ear twitched. He turned his head a fraction, just enough to let Riven know he was still listening. It was given, he said, but I kept it. The way he said it, like someone who had buried many names behind them, felt like the closing of a gate, not cruelly, just protectively. Who gave it to you? Riven asked quietly. Cale didn't answer. The silence returned, but this time it felt different, full of edges. Riven shifted back under the blanket, unsure if he'd asked too much. Then Cale spoke again, softer now, as if the words cost him. She called me that. The last one. Riven's breath caught. Was she like me? Cale shook his head slowly. No, she was older, quieter. She never raised her voice, but I could hear her anyway. What happened to her? Cale stared out the window into the woods, where the wind moved like ghosts through the trees. One day she didn't come back. There was no bitterness in the words, no tremor, just a statement worn smooth by time. I waited, Cale said, for 3 winters. Silence. And then I stopped waiting. Riven felt the lump form in his throat. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if there was anything to say. Is that why you live out here? He asked. Alone? Cale didn't answer right away, but then his voice came again, low and without armor. Some things don't belong in cities. Some things forget how to be part of packs. Riven nodded slowly. Like me. Cale looked at him then. Not hard, not sharp, just looked. You remember your name, he said. Yeah. Then you're not lost yet. Riven blinked. Somewhere deep inside, where it had been dark for so long, something cracked open, just a sliver, a small breath of warmth in a place that had only known cold. He pulled the blanket closer. Good night, Cale. Cale turned his gaze back toward the trees. Sleep. The fire hissed softly as a coal split in 2. Outside, the wind carried their names through the branches. Cale, the name he kept, and Riven, the name he still carried like a question. Both written in breath, in silence, in the kind of bond that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. And for the first time, Riven didn't feel nameless anymore. The scream wasn't his voice, but it tore through him like it was, flashing red, then white, then everything turned orange, too bright to be dawn, too loud to be thunder. Metal groaned. A woman's voice shouted something sharp, broken French. Someone else was crying. Someone else was burning. Riven couldn't move. His feet were stuck in something wet, not mud, not mud. Then the fire rose again, swallowed the doorway, and the air melted into sirens. He turned to run and hit the ground instead. Riven jolted upright with a gasp, heart hammering like it had been running through the nightmare ahead of him. He clawed at the threadbare blanket tangled around his legs. The fire had long since died. The coals were cold. The night had sunk into that deep, watchful silence just before morning, and Cale was staring at him, not startled, not angry, just watching, like he had been for some time. His amber eyes caught the faint light through the broken shutter slat's eyes that saw in the dark, that missed nothing, his body still, not tense, not relaxed, just waiting. Riven sat there, chest heaving, sweat cold down his spine. Cale didn't speak. Riven looked down at his hands. They were shaking. His knuckles were white from gripping the edge of the floorboard. I didn't mean to wake you." Cale didn't blink. "You didn't." The boy swallowed hard. There was soot under his nails. His palms smelled like fear. "It was just a dream." A pause. "No," Cale said quietly. "It wasn't." Riven looked at him. Something in the stillness of Cale's voice made it clear he knew. Somehow he knew the difference between a bad dream and the kind that left scars behind the eyes. "There was fire," Riven whispered. "And noise. People yelling. A woman, I think." He trailed off. The images were already falling apart, like ash dissolving in wind. But the heat remained. The fear remained. Cale's head tilted slightly, not like a question, more like confirmation, as if he'd seen this kind of waking before, as if he had this kind of waking. "Was I there?" Riven asked suddenly. "I mean, before. In that fire. Did something happen to me?" Cale didn't answer, not because he didn't know, but because some truths didn't belong to the present yet. Instead, he stood, walked to the edge of the room where the cabin wall was warped from age. He nosed open a piece of torn tarp covering the broken doorframe. The woods beyond were shrouded in silver mist. "You're safe now," Cale said. Simple, quiet. But something in the way he said it, not like a promise, but a vow made Riven's throat tighten. "How do you know?" Riven asked, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "How do you know they're not looking for me? That I'm not someone they want back?" Cale turned slowly. The faint light caught the old scar on his flank, the rough fur, the burn marks beneath his left eye. All stories, all things he never told. "They wouldn't want you back," Cale said, voice flat. "They wanted you gone." Silence. Then Cale stepped forward, his paws barely making a sound on the old wood. "That's why you're still alive." Riven's mouth went dry. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to need to believe it. But something in his bones, deeper than memory, recognized the truth in those words. He looked down again. "It felt real." Cale nodded. "It was." A log popped in the hearth, cracking into ash. The wind sighed once through the window. "Will it happen again?" Riven asked. Cale sat, his frame casting a long, jagged shadow against the cabin wall. "Yes." No sugarcoating, no comforting lies. "But one day," Cale added, "it won't own you anymore." Riven stared at him. "Did you have dreams like that?" Cale didn't blink. "I had worse." A beat. "I still do." There was something chilling in the simplicity of it, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest, because he wasn't trying to shield Riven from the darkness. He was showing him how to carry it. Riven pulled the blanket back up to his chin, teeth starting to chatter again, not from cold, but from knowing. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay." And Cale, without moving closer, without changing expression, simply said, "Sleep, I'll watch." Those last words, they settled into Riven's chest like the opposite of fire, a slow, wordless safety. He lay back down. This time, when sleep came again, it came through smoke and memory, but it passed through Cale's shadow first, and that made all the difference. The wind shifted first. Then came the smell. Not rot, not pine. Something older metallic, faintly sweet, but hollow, like a ghost with breath. Cale's ears pricked up. His pace slowed until it stopped entirely. Riven, still trailing behind in silence, nearly bumped into his side. "What is it?" the boy whispered. Cale didn't answer. His entire body had gone still, not the way prey animals freeze, but like stone learning to remember. The wind teased his fur as his eyes fixed forward. Before them, the forest opened unexpectedly into a clearing. A large circle of blackened ground, ringed by brittle saplings that looked melted at the roots. Charred stumps jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Nothing grew here. Even the moss was dead, and in the center, a pile of ash years old but undisturbed smoked faintly, though no fire remained. Riven instinctively took a step back. "What happened here?" Kyle's voice, when it finally came, was low, hollow in a way Riven had never heard. "I know this place." The boy glanced at him. "You've been here before?" Kyle took one step forward, then another. His paw sank into the soot and left no print. "This is where I stopped being a hero," he said. The sentence hung there like a sentence from a verdict, quiet, irreversible. It had been years ago, or maybe just a different life. Kyle hadn't been alone then. He'd worn a harness, stamped with numbers. There'd been a man with him, voice sharp, hands calloused but steady. His name was Sergeant Juno, and Juno had believed in him. They were chasing whispers that day, fragments of radio chatter, a distress beacon buried beneath 2 layers of encryption. The village was supposed to be empty, a ghost town claimed by war and greed. That was the official story, but it wasn't empty. Cale had smelled the difference first. A metallic tang buried beneath the scorched earth and gun oil, the scent of people who weren't supposed to be there. Children, fuel, wire. He tried to signal, pawing at the ground, whining once. Juno had listened. He always did. But someone else had overruled. A voice crackled through the comms, cold and distant. "Proceed." They did. Kyle remembered the door that wouldn't open, the floorboard that gave too easily, the boy's face just before the roof collapsed. He remembered running in with Juno, trying to pull them out only for the second blast to take everything. Juno's hand had stayed clenched on Cale's harness until the very end. After that, there had been silence, and then command told him to move on, to reacquire the trail, as if nothing had happened. Cale stood now where that memory was born, though time had peeled away the buildings, the bones, the names. Only ash remained. Riven's voice was cautious behind him. "What do you mean, not a hero?" Kyle didn't look at him. "I followed orders." A pause. "When I should have disobeyed." Riven stepped beside him, gazing out at the scorched hollow. "But you tried to save them, didn't you?" Kyle exhaled slowly through his nose, almost a sigh, almost a howl remembered too late. "Trying," he said, "doesn't unburn the bodies." His words weren't cruel, just tired, just truthful. Riven looked down at the blackened earth. He bent, ran his fingers lightly across a shard of something half-buried ceramic, maybe. A piece of someone's cup. A meal never finished. "Is this why you came out here?" he asked. "Why you live like this?" Kyle didn't answer immediately. "I came here," he said at last, "because nowhere else wanted what I became." The wind stirred the ash. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called once and was gone. Riven stood silently, absorbing the weight of it. He had seen Cale fight off coyotes. He had seen the patience in him, the wordless protection. But now he saw the cracks, the guilt that never healed right. "You could have run," Riven murmured. "Back then. Let them handle it. Saved yourself." Cale looked at him, eyes unreadable. "I did." That answer hit harder than anything Riven expected. "I ran," Cale added, quieter now. "After Juno fell. I was ordered to pursue. I hesitated. I ran." He paused. "I found one child alive. Dragged her through the creek bed. Hid for 3 days until extraction." His voice tightened just a hair. "She didn't make it." And just like that, the silence returned. Riven crouched beside him, not close enough to touch, but near enough to offer presence. He didn't know what to say. Maybe there was nothing to say. But he did something else. He reached into his coat pocket, the tattered one Cale had found him in, pulled out the half-burned button he'd kept since waking in the woods, the only thing that had survived with him. He set it in the ash gently. "Then maybe we both start from here," Riven said. Cale looked at the button, then at the boy, and for a long time said nothing. But something in his chest, something buried under years of command, failure, and solitude shifted. Just a fraction. But it was the first real movement in a long, long time. The sky above the clearing had darkened, not from clouds, but from something heavier memory, maybe. Riven sat cross-legged at the edge of the ash, elbows resting on his knees, eyes distant but alive. Cale stood a few paces away, still half in shadow. His fur was streaked with soot, his jaw set like stone. The ghosts had not left him, not entirely, but something about the boy's presence kept them from swallowing the moment whole. Silence clung to them like a second skin. Until Riven spoke. "You saved me." Cale turned his head slightly, just enough to show he'd heard. But he didn't interrupt. Riven's voice wasn't pleading. It wasn't naive either. It was quiet, like someone speaking not to win, but to remember. "That night," he continued, "with the rain, the coyotes, you didn't have to stay. But you did." He looked down, brushing his fingers over the button he'd placed in the ash. "And now we're both standing here, alive." Cale's ears flicked, his gaze lowered. He didn't move. "I don't care what you did before," Riven said. "To me, you're still a hero." The words landed like something fragile but unbroken placed gently in a burned-out chapel. Cale closed his eyes. For the first time in days, maybe years, his posture eased. Not much, just enough for the air to shift around him. His breath slowed. His spine didn't carry as much weight. He walked to where the boy sat and lowered himself beside him. Not out of duty, out of choice. "Words like that," he murmured, "they'll get you killed." "So will wandering alone in the woods with no food and a busted memory," Riven countered, a half-smile creeping through the ash on his face. Cale snorted. The faintest sound, half amusement, half disbelief. But it wasn't mockery. It was life. Riven looked up, face lit not by fire but by something steadier. "You said you used to follow orders. What about now?" Cale stared out toward the far end of the clearing, where the tree line resumed like a gate to somewhere else. "Now," he said slowly, "I follow instincts. And instinct says you won't last another week without learning faster. He turned to meet Riven's eyes, direct, unwavering. So if I'm going to keep you breathing, then you better learn fast. There was no harshness in his tone, no bark of command. Just a simple truth, offered like a knife in the hand. Riven nodded once. Teach me then. Cale watched him for a long second, as if deciding something unspoken. Then he stood. Come on. Where? We move before the light dies. Riven groaned, but rose anyway. As they left the scorched clearing behind, the boy glanced back once, not in fear, in remembrance. Cale didn't look back. He didn't need to, because for the first time in years someone had looked at him, seen him, and spoken a word he hadn't allowed himself to believe, and somehow it didn't feel like a curse. It felt like a thread, thin, fragile, but real, something to follow forward. The woods had a rhythm, bird calls in bursts, wind in the leaves, the crunch of light frost beneath cautious footsteps. But on that morning, something was off. Cale stopped mid-stride. Riven, a few paces behind, nearly bumped into him. He opened his mouth to ask, but Cale's head was already tilted, ears drawn taut. The forest held its breath, and Cale could smell it. Metal, oil, leather, human, but not the broken, fearful scent of refugees. Not the meandering, desperate trail of wanderers like the ones they'd skirted before. This was calculated, measured, boots that knew how to move without being heard, but couldn't mask the things they carried. He lowered his muzzle, nose brushing the undergrowth. Tracks. The imprint of military-grade soles tread deep and wide, too recent, too clean. Someone's here, Cale said, barely above a whisper. Riven stiffened. Here, as in following us? Cale didn't answer. He didn't have to. His shoulders had already tensed. The air around him had shifted like a bow, pulled taut, waiting for the arrow. He moved quickly now, not running but gliding through the brush, body low. Riven followed, no longer needing instruction, just trust. They moved up a slight ridge, and from the crest Cale scanned the tree line. Then he saw it, a broken branch. Clean snap. Not the kind from wind or wildlife. Purposeful. Deliberate. Further down, a subtle depression in the moss. Boot print again, this time facing the direction they'd come from. Riven's voice was low now, almost afraid to make sound. Who would be looking for us? Cale didn't turn. His eyes locked on the horizon. Not us, he said grimly. Me. The wind shifted again, blowing the scent clearer now, smoke, faint and artificial. Not wood, not pine. Something burned hot and fast, like signal flares. His lip curled instinctively, not in fear, in recognition. Riven crouched beside him, arms wrapped around his knees. You think they're dangerous? Cale's answer was swift. Yes. The woods felt smaller suddenly, the trees thinner, the sky too open. Riven followed Cale's gaze. Are they soldiers? Cale didn't reply for a moment. Then, worse, cleaners. The word meant little to Riven, but the way Cale said it, the bitterness in his voice, the barely hidden snarl was enough. They don't ask. They don't report. They erase. A cold shiver ran down Riven's back. Cale took a breath, steady and deep. Then he turned, eyes colder than the morning frost. We move. Now, quietly. They doubled back along a different path, Kale guiding them away from where the scent drifted strongest. But it was too late to feel untouched. The forest wasn't just theirs anymore. It had been marked, and someone else was watching the trail. It happened in a blink. 1 second, Riven was walking. The next, Kale lunged sideways, body slamming into the boy's legs, sending them both crashing to the dirt. The silence afterward wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of something just missed. Above them, no more than a foot off the ground, a thin wire trembled in the breeze. Camouflaged expertly with pine needles and a scatter of dry leaves, it had almost vanished into the forest floor. Almost. Riven lay there, stunned. His breath caught in his chest. Kale's paw pressed against his shoulder, firm but not rough. Grounding. Don't move. Kale's nose twitched. His eyes narrowed, scanning the terrain. Then he stepped forward, circled the wire, and with a practiced nudge of his snout, traced it to its anchor, a pressure hook rigged to a spring snare, and a triggered spike trap aimed at chest height. "This wasn't for animals," Kale growled. Riven pushed himself up slowly, blood still pounding in his ears. "I didn't even see it. I would have died," Kyle said bluntly. Or worse. There was no comfort in his tone, just truth. Kyle padded around the perimeter, studying how it was built, calculating. Then, with a sharp motion, he used a rock to press the trigger. The trap snapped upward with a sickening metal shriek, releasing a crude spear that would have run straight through flesh. Riven flinched. Kyle said nothing at first. Then he turned to the boy, voice steady. "Look again. Show me where the wire was." Riven hesitated. His fingers trembled as he pointed to the wrong spot. "No, that's where your foot landed. Where was the wire?" Riven swallowed, eyes scanning frantically. It took nearly a full minute before he whispered, "There." Kale nodded. "Again." They did it 3 more times. Kale made him kneel, made him brush the dirt gently, feel for irregularities, broken twigs, flattened moss, the scent of oil. "They smell like metal and chemicals," Kale said. "Not earth, not wind. They? The people who lay traps for ghosts." Riven didn't ask what that meant. He didn't want to know. Not yet. Kale led him another 15 feet into the trees, then stopped beside a different tree tall, ancient, with roots like gnarled hands. At its base, a tiny glint of brass shone beneath some needles. Riven squatted. He reached out, then looked to Kale. "Go ahead," Kale said. "Touch it." The boy pressed gently. A tripwire snapped taut. He yanked his hand back. "Dummy charge," Kale muttered. "A warning." "For who?" Kyle looked up toward the ridge, toward where the scent of strangers still lingered faintly in the shifting wind. "For whoever they're chasing, or for whoever gets too close." The trees stood quiet around them, but the silence was no longer serene. Now it felt like something waiting to close its jaw. Kyle's voice cut through the unease. "Lesson 1. The forest is not just branches and leaves. It's intent. Listen with your skin, not just your ears." Riven nodded, brow furrowed in focus. Kyle walked ahead a few paces, then stopped. "Lesson 2. When you feel safe, you're already behind." He turned back, eyes hard, but not cruel. "You almost died today because you were thinking like a child. That luxury is gone." Riven bit the inside of his cheek, not in shame, but in understanding. A moment passed. Kyle's tone shifted softer, not quite kind, but steadier. "You learn this now, or you don't last." The boy met his eyes. "I'll learn." Kael gave a single nod. Then they walked on, wary, silent, and a little wiser than before. And behind them, the snare still swayed, waiting for someone else to forget the forest was watching. The fire was small, barely more than a flickering breath beneath a ring of stones Kael had assembled with almost ritual precision. Its glow barely touched the bark of the trees around them. Beyond it, the woods loomed black and unknowable. Riven sat close to the warmth, knees drawn to his chest, a blanket of pine needles beneath him. The scent of sap and char lingered in the air. Kael lay beside the fire, not asleep, not fully alert, just there, in that watchful stillness only animals and old soldiers seemed to master. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't empty. It felt like part of the forest itself, like something sacred. But eventually, Riven's voice broke it soft, almost apologetic. "Why do they do it?" Kyle's eyes flicked toward him. "The traps, the ones for people." A beat, then, in a low voice, "Fear, control, profit, take your pick." The fire cracked, sending a tiny plume of sparks into the sky. Kael continued, voice calm but edged with something colder. "Beasts kill to feed their belly. Man kills to feed a story." Riven frowned, absorbing it in that way children do, deeper than they show. He hesitated, then asked, "Are we still being hunted?" Kael didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the shadows just beyond the light. Then he said, "Always assume yes. That's how you stay alive." The boy nodded, staring at his fingers, still stained faintly from pine pitch and dirt. Then, after a while, "Kael," the dog lifted his head. You said man can love. But he can also chain. Which one did you get?" Kael didn't blink. For a moment the question just hung there between them, the boy's breath shallow, the dog's body still as stone. Then Kael turned back toward the fire. His voice didn't come, not a sound. And in that silence, something was said. A memory passed through Kael's eyes, unspoken but sharp, like a shard of glass beneath skin. The boy felt it, though he didn't know what it was. He didn't press. But something in him shifted. He leaned forward, placed a small stick into the fire, watched it hiss and blacken. "I think," Riven said quietly, "you were loved once, before the chain." Kael didn't confirm, didn't need to. His silence wrapped around the fire like a second skin, not rejection, not denial, just a truth too heavy for words. They sat like that for a long while. The forest creaked and sighed around them. Somewhere far off a night bird called, a single warbled cry. Then silence again. Riven finally lay down beside Kael. Not too close. Just enough to feel the heat of him, to know he wasn't alone. The fire crackled, the shadows whispered, and in that fragile space between boy and beast, something softened. Kael didn't speak of the chains. But that night, as Riven drifted to sleep, he heard the dog breathing steady beside him, guarding him, choosing not to run. The roar came before the river itself. It was the kind of sound that made your ribs feel hollow, a deep thrumming surge that seemed to rise from beneath the earth. Riven stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, eyes wide as the curtain of pine trees pulled back to reveal a river swollen with meltwater and fury. The water foamed against boulders like teeth. A tree limb twisted in the current, then snapped apart like kindling. The whole thing moved with a mindless power indifferent, untamed. Riven stepped back. "We can't cross that," he said. Kael didn't answer. He was already walking toward the water's edge, nose tilted, reading the wind, the spray, the slope. His body alert, not tense, just tuned. The way a wire holds sound. Riven followed reluctantly. The bank was steep and muddy. Stones like slick bones lined the bottom, invisible beneath the churn. The current hissed and snarled where it collided with driftwood. Somewhere upstream, thunder echoed again, distant but insistent. "We'll be swept away," Riven murmured. Kael turned, eyes locking on him. "That's if you fight it." The boy blinked. Kael padded closer, circled once, then nodded toward the shallows, where a stretch of river narrowed between two moss-covered rocks. "There," he said. "Fastest water. Least time in." Riven looked at it. It didn't seem better, just faster, louder, more alive. "I'm not strong enough." Kael stepped closer, muzzle inches from the boy's hand. "Not about strength. About timing. About trust." The wind lifted Kael's fur like smoke. "You move with the water. You breathe with it. It tries to take you. You give just enough to pass." Riven stared at the crossing. His feet stayed planted. "I'm scared." Kael's voice was quiet. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it freeze you." The boy exhaled slowly. Then, without another word, Kael leapt one fluid motion, paws slicing the air, then vanishing into the current. For a moment, Riven lost him in the white churn. His chest clamped tight. Then there, a flash of fur. Kael surged upward, shoulders breaking the surface as he angled his body low, diagonally with the current. He didn't fight it. He moved like he belonged to it. Seconds later, he scrambled up the far bank, drenched but alive. He shook once, then turned and waited. Riven stood alone. The wind picked up. His heart hammered so loud it drowned everything else. He stepped back, then forward. Another step, and then he ran. The cold hit like a slap, stealing breath, biting straight to bone. The current caught him immediately, spinning his legs, yanking his frame sideways. Panic flared. His arms thrashed. His breath came in gasps. Water filled his mouth. He sank. Everything went soundless, just the murk, the spin, a flash of sky, then river again. His limbs flailed, directionless. Then Kael's voice in his head. "With the water. Breathe with it." He forced his body to angle, twisted toward the far bank, kicked, let go of the fight, and moved with the pull instead. A branch scraped his leg. His elbow slammed into a rock, but forward, yes, forward. The river threw him against the bank like a rag. He coughed, claws digging at mud, then felt strong jaws close gently around the back of his coat, yanking him up. He collapsed beside Kael, coughing, gasping, soaked to the marrow. Kael didn't say anything for a long time, just watched him. Riven looked up, lips trembling from cold and adrenaline. I thought I was going to drown." Kael blinked once. "But you didn't." Riven lay on his side, chest heaving. A laugh escaped him, raw, shaky, but real. "That was awful." Kael gave a low grunt, almost amused. "You'll remember next time." Riven closed his eyes. The sound of the river remained behind them, loud, endless, but now on the other side. He had made it, not perfectly, not cleanly, but he had made it, and Kael had waited. The rain had passed, but the world still dripped. They moved through the forest like ghosts, silent, damp, marked only by the occasional crackle of wet leaves under Riven's boots. The air held that sharp, metallic scent of recent storms, and somewhere in the canopy a lone raven cawed once and fell quiet. Riven walked behind Cale, eyes scanning low branches. That's when he saw it. Something caught in a bramble fluttering, almost like a trapped wing. He paused, frowning, then stepped closer. A torn strip of blue fabric, dirty, faded, snagged high on a bent oak branch. The edges were frayed, wind-worn, but just visible beneath the mud, and mold was a flash of stitching. Letters, half-torn. Canine, Uni. He reached for it. Cale! The shepherd turned. One look and everything changed. Cale didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the fabric like it had slapped him. Riven held it out slowly. It weighed nothing, and yet Cale didn't take it. His breath had shortened almost imperceptibly. "It's part of a vest, isn't it?" Riven asked, voice hushed. No answer, just the whisper of wind against bark. Cale stepped forward carefully, as if the patch might vanish. He took it between his teeth, not like prey, not like evidence, but gently, reverently, like memory. Then he let it fall. A pause stretched, long enough to feel like something sacred was being remembered. "I wore that," Cale said finally, eyes not meeting Riven's. His voice was low, rough, before the silence. The boy waited. Cale sat down slowly, the way old soldiers do when the weight of their own bones reminds them they've carried too much for too long. "They gave it to me after my third mission," he continued, as if speaking not to Riven but to the forest itself. "Bright blue, easier to see. Supposed to make civilians trust me. Supposed to show I wasn't a threat." He scoffed, soft, bitter. "Turns out visibility makes you easy to aim at, too." Riven held his breath. Cale's eyes drifted up to the trees, his body still, but his voice cracked faintly. "The last time I wore it, there was a boy, maybe your age, screaming, buried under glass and steel. I got to him, pulled him out. A beat. But I was too late for the ones behind him." Cale's gaze darkened, clouded with something heavy regret, maybe, or memory too thick to name. "They said I hesitated." Another pause. "They were right." Riven swallowed hard. He moved closer, kneeling in the moss beside Cale. "Is that why you stopped wearing it?" Cale's jaw twitched. "No, they tore it off. Said I didn't deserve it anymore." Silence fell again, this time not uncomfortable but reverent, the kind of silence that holds truth gently in both hands. The patch of blue lay between them like a question, like a scar. Finally, Cale stood. He nudged the fabric once, then turned away from it. "Come," he said. "There's nothing good in staring backward too long." Riven didn't argue, but as he followed, he glanced back once. The blue patch stirred in the breeze like a heartbeat, and in that moment, he understood something unspoken. Cale didn't leave the uniform behind. The world did. They didn't speak much after finding the blue patch. The forest grew denser as evening fell, branches folding overhead like the ribs of something ancient. Shadows ran longer here, tangled in roots, and the hush of remembering things best left forgotten. Riven kept close, watching Cale's shoulders. The shepherd moved quieter than the wind, yet something in his gait was different now, heavier, like every step was being measured against a memory. They stopped near an old ravine, shallow but deep enough to swallow a child whole if he wasn't careful. Cale sniffed the air, then sat near a moss-covered log. not for safety, for distance. Riven sat too, knees pulled in. The silence stretched. Then softly, too softly, it came. "You're not just Kyle." Cale didn't look at him. "You're someone," Riven said again, braver this time. "You mattered. I can feel it, even when you don't say it." Cale's ears twitched, but he remained still. Then, after a breath long enough to mark a season, he spoke. "I was badge number 729, he said flatly. "Designation, K9 Alpha." The words dropped like stones in a well. "I served 8 deployments, 3 cities, 2 war zones, and 1 place so classified they didn't even give it a name. Just coordinates." His voice had gone quiet, controlled, like muscle memory stepping back into the cadence of briefing reports and debriefing rooms. "They trained me to protect, to hunt, to obey." He paused. "And then they left me." A long breath. Not even a bullet to end it clean. Just a closed door. One I couldn't open. Kyle stood suddenly. Not abrupt, but with purpose, like he couldn't bear to be still any longer. "They call us loyal until we break," he murmured. "Then we're defective." He turned his back. "Don't let them name you," he said over his shoulder. "Don't give them that power." And then he walked. Not far. Just enough to leave the question unanswered. But Riven rose too. No hesitation, no fear. He followed. Branches scraped against his sleeves, shadows brushed his cheeks, but he didn't slow. His breath came faster, but not from exhaustion. "You still have a name," he called gently. "Even if they forgot it. I didn't." Kyle stopped. For a moment, he didn't turn. But something in the quiet shifted, just enough. The boy stepped closer, not rushing, not demanding, just present. And in that moment, Cale's shoulders lowered, not in defeat, but in a kind of surrender that only comes when someone chooses to stay. The wind shifted. Kyle halted, body still as stone, nose tilted subtly toward the west. His breath, invisible in the morning chill, slowed to a controlled rhythm. Riven felt it before he saw anything. Something taut in the silence, like a bowstring pulled too tight. They were not alone. The trees were thinner here, birches pale like bones. Their shadows dappled the ground in broken stripes, perfect for movement, perfect for hiding. Kyle didn't speak. He didn't need to. A twitch of his ears was enough. Riven crouched. Instinctively now. Not out of fear, but preparation. That was new. Cale stepped aside. Deliberately. Riven's eyes flicked to him, confused. The message in Cale's gaze was clear. "You lead." And then Cale stepped back into the brush, vanishing like smoke. Riven's heart thumped hard in his chest. Not from terror, but from something sharper. Sharper than the cold, sharper than doubt. Resolve. He waited, listened. A rustle behind the ferns. Soft, wrong. Too careful to be a deer. Too small to be a bear. He turned slightly, body low, remembering Cale's lessons. Smell the wind, feel the ground. Become the silence. A snap of twig. There. A flash of movement, a blur of fur streaking through the grass. Coyote. Its eyes glinted yellow, hungry, desperate. It lunged. Riven didn't run. He pivoted sideways the way Kyle showed him, letting momentum do the work. His elbow collided with the animal's side, not enough to break it, but enough to throw it off. It yelped, spun around, and came again. This time, Riven grabbed a fallen branch and brought it down hard. Once, twice. The coyote staggered, backed off. From the corner of his eye, Riven caught more movement. A second one, then a third. His grip tightened around the branch, breath ragged, mind racing. Don't panic. Don't run. Make yourself bigger. Use their fear. He stepped back slowly, keeping the coyotes in view. They circled. Kyle hadn't moved. He watched from the trees, eyes glowing faintly in the shadows, testing him. Not out of cruelty, Riven knew now, but necessity. Another lunge, this one from the side. Riven dropped flat, letting the animal miss, and rolled to his feet, swinging hard. He made contact. A sharp yelp, blood on bark. The pack hesitated. One coyote snarled, but it wasn't sure anymore. Neither was the second. And suddenly Riven saw it. He wasn't prey. Not anymore. They could sense it too. A shift in posture. In presence. Predators knew when something had changed, and so they backed off. Not far, but far enough to slink back into the undergrowth. Riven stood alone in the clearing, chest heaving, branch splintered in his hand. And then Cale emerged, silent. But his gaze was different now, less guarded. He circled the boy once, checking, evaluating, then nodded. "Messy," he said, not unkindly, "but not helpless." Riven looked down at his torn sleeve. Blood trickled from a shallow scrape along his forearm. But it wasn't the wound he noticed most. It was the fire in his lungs, the ache in his muscles, the proof that he had fought back and won. "I didn't freeze," he said quietly. Kyle's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile Riven had ever seen. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." They didn't speak as they moved deeper into the pines. The air had thickened, no longer just cold, but heavy, scented with rust and damp leaves. Riven followed Cale's lead, steps matching his in silence, though his eyes drifted often toward his mentor's gait. Something was wrong. Kale's movement wasn't as clean. There was a hitch in his stride, slight, but there. The kind only someone watching closely would see. His right foreleg didn't bear full weight. His breath, too, had changed. Slower, measured, too measured. Riven said nothing until the blood started to show. Dark drops, nearly black, fell like punctuation on the path behind them. 1, 2, 3, each slower than the last, but undeniable. "You're bleeding," Riven said, stopping. Cale didn't answer. He didn't look back. But his shoulder trembled just once before he finally sank to the ground beside a hollow log, legs folding beneath him with careful control. Not collapse, but close. Riven approached cautiously, not out of fear, but out of respect. Kyle hated weakness. Even now his eyes burned with resistance. The gash along his flank was deep. A coyote must have gotten a tooth in low, near the ribs. It hadn't bled fast, but it had bled long. The fur around it was clumped, dark and wet. Kyle's breath was shallow now, his body taut with tension he refused to release. "We need to stop the bleeding," Riven whispered. Kyle didn't argue. That alone told Riven how serious it was. The boy worked in silence, his hands trembling only at first. He remembered the stream they'd passed a few hundred yards back. He gathered snow instead, packing it gently over the wound to slow the bleeding. Then he stripped a strip of cloth from his own sleeve, still damp with sweat and dust, and pressed it against the injury. Cale flinched, a low growl humming in his throat, but didn't bite, not once. Riven tightened the makeshift bandage and sat back on his heels, breath fogging the air. The forest had gone quiet, too quiet. Birdsong had stopped. Even the wind seemed to hush. "I'll keep watch," he said. Kyle eyes blinked slowly. Exhaustion battled instinct behind them. But he didn't move, didn't rise. Riven took position beside him, scanning the tree line. He didn't realize it until now how much Kyle had always done for him. All the times the older dog had walked ahead, ears twitching, nose twitching, always listening for danger, always one step between Riven and the teeth of the world. And now, for the first time, Cale slept. Riven stayed up. He listened to every branch creak, every squirrel chatter, every leaf shift in the underbrush. When the wind picked up, he leaned closer to Kyle, shielding him from the cold as best he could with the curve of his body. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was sharp, alert. But Riven didn't run from it. He carried it. Midnight passed in stillness. At one point, Kyle stirred, a soft breath escaping him like the sigh of a tree in winter. "You should have left me," he murmured. Riven looked down, his voice steady. "You didn't leave me." A pause. Then Cale said something that cut deeper than the wound itself. "It's easier to survive alone, but it's harder to stay alive." The boy didn't respond. He just tightened the cloth again, careful, firm, hands no longer trembling, because in that moment the wilds had taken something from them both and replaced it with something else. Trust. Fragile, but earned. And for now, that was enough. The night was long and cold. Riven kept the fire alive with small, careful hands. Each time the flames dipped low, he fed them pine needles, twigs, strips of bark. Not too much, Kyle had taught him that. Fire was a whisper in the woods, not a roar. Too loud, and things came looking. Kyle lay nearby, his breathing shallow but steady, wrapped in silence. Riven sat beside him, knees pulled to his chest, eyes flickering between the embers and the tree line. He didn't sleep, didn't dare. The stars overhead blinked slowly, like eyes watching from above. The moon had already fallen behind the ridge. All that was left was frost and the slow hush of wind through trees. And still, Riven watched. Kyle's body occasionally tensed in his sleep. Maybe dreams, maybe pain. Once he whimpered, a sound so low and wounded it didn't sound like him. It sounded like someone else. Someone young. Someone left behind. Riven reached over and rested a hand near Kyle's paw. Not touching, just close. "I'm here," the boy whispered, no louder than a breath. It wasn't brave, it wasn't heroic, but it was something steady. Somewhere near dawn, the fire had sunk to red bones. Riven, eyes heavy now, still sat upright. His head bobbed forward, then snapped up again. He rubbed his eyes. But he didn't lie down. Instead, when he could no longer sit straight, he curled beside Kyle. One arm over the older dog's back, his body a silent shield against the chill. He didn't hear the first stir of breath behind him, didn't notice Kyle's eyes open. Kyle blinked, the world slowly forming through the haze of pain and memory. The forest was still. The fire, nothing more than a glow. His wound throbbed, but it was clean, wrapped, and beside him, curled close like a cub who didn't yet know the world could be cruel, was Riven. The boy had kept the fire going, had stayed awake all night. Cale shifted slightly. The boy didn't stir. Cale stared at the sky above, then at the boy, then at the blood-stained ground near the log where he'd fallen. And for a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice low enough not to wake the forest, he spoke. "You did good, pup." Not loud, not proud, but real. There was a kind of weight in those words, as if something long buried had loosened in Cale's chest, something not spoken since the day the kennel doors closed behind him and the badge was taken from his name. Riven stirred, barely conscious, but his hand shifted instinctively, pressing closer. And Cale, broken, tired half-ghost of the dog he once was, rested his muzzle beside the boy's shoulder. Not because he had to, but because he trusted him. The sun had not yet risen, but somewhere in that clearing, fire still lived, not in the ash, in them, together. The trees parted just as they had the first time, but everything felt different now. Riven stepped through the brush with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. His steps no longer faltered. His eyes scanned, instinctively checking wind direction, listening for birds, watching the underbrush like Cale had taught him. The boy had learned to walk quieter, to listen deeper, to think before reaching. And when the old cabin finally came into view, its slanted roof sagging like a tired shoulder, smoke chimney cold, it didn't look broken anymore. It looked like something waiting. Cale stood behind him, his weight still favoring his unhealed side, but his posture straight, alert, present. The wound had slowed him, yes, but not dulled him. The wolf inside still listened, still judged, still watched the boy. Riven paused just a few paces from the door. His breath clouded in the cool air. Then he looked back. "You said once this wasn't home," he said quietly. Cale didn't answer. Riven looked at the door again. "But it kind of is now, isn't it?" No birds sang, just the soft creak of a branch above and the wind pressing against the walls like a memory. Cale moved forward, slow and deliberate, his paw prints beside the boy's in the soft earth, not in front, not behind, beside. Riven reached for the latch and pushed the door open. The air inside was stale but not dead. A few pine cones in the corner, moss trying to push in through the windows. The old blanket was still there, crumpled in the spot Cale used to rest. Riven smiled faintly at it, then stepped in without hesitation. He moved differently now, no longer afraid of dark corners or creaking boards. He didn't flinch at the way the wind whistled under the eaves, didn't hesitate before lighting the fire. He found dry wood from the stash they'd buried near the porch. He struck the flint on the first try. And when the flames caught, they didn't just warm the room, they lit up something in his face. Something earned. Cale entered last, silent, watchful. He sniffed once, then twice, nose sweeping the air. No scent of intrusion, no unfamiliar prints. Safe, for now. He curled near the fire without command, lowering himself with a grunt he didn't try to hide. Pain was still there, but so was trust. Riven settled across from him, cross-legged. The fire crackled. Neither spoke at first. They didn't need to. Outside, the forest exhaled. Even the wind had changed, less sharp, less lonely. This place had not changed, but they had. Riven leaned back against the log wall and looked at Cale. "I don't feel like the same kid who ran in here that first night." Cale looked at him, one eye half closed, unreadable. "You're not," he said simply. Riven thought about that. About the river, the snare, the coyotes, the blood. About holding Cale's body and whispering to the trees to let him live. He looked back at the fire, then up again. I didn't think I could be brave. Cale's voice was a low rumble. Bravery isn't what you feel. It's what you do anyway. A long pause. Then Riven smiled, not wide, not foolish, but real. I miss this place, he said. Cale didn't reply, but his tail thumped once against the wood. It was enough. Later, Riven found himself dozing by the fire, wrapped in the same old blanket. Cale's breath rose and fell in rhythm beside him. For the first time, the silence didn't press on Riven. It held him. And as the stars blinked through the cracks in the roof above, he whispered without needing a response, We're still here. And the fire answered softly, Yes. It was the sob that broke the quiet, a thin, cracked sound barely human, carried on the wind through the trees. Riven's head lifted first. Cale was already up, ears forward, hackles rising not from threat, but instinct. Another cry, closer now, frantic, muffled by leaves. Riven moved before thinking, pushing open the cabin door and stepping out into the gray hush of dusk. The forest breathed around them, every shadow longer, every noise sharper. Then he saw her. A girl, no older than 10, stumbled through the undergrowth. Mud caked her legs. Her hair, once braided, now tangled with twigs. Her jacket was torn, one shoe missing. She turned wildly, as if chased by ghosts. When her eyes found Riven, she froze. Then the crying came back, raw, childlike, real. Cale stepped in front of Riven, body taut, not growling, but not relaxed either. The girl didn't move. Neither did Cale. Riven's voice was small, unsure. She's lost. Cale's stance remained like stone. Only his eyes moved, measuring, watching. She's scared, Riven said again, softer. Still, Cale didn't blink. Finally, Cale spoke, not to the girl, but to him. Helping means being seen. The words landed like a weight. Riven looked up at him, unsure. Then we help and hide again. Cale's eyes didn't waver. We're safe because we stay forgotten. But she's not, Riven said. And then he stepped forward. Cale didn't stop him. The girl flinched as Riven approached, but he dropped to one knee, hands open, voice careful. It's okay. You're not in trouble. Are you hurt? She shook her head, then nodded, then shook again. Her teeth chattered. Her knees buckled. Riven caught her before she fell. Cale's growl was nearly inaudible. Not toward her, at the world. Riven looked back over his shoulder. We can't leave her out here. Cale didn't answer, but after a long moment he turned back toward the cabin. A silent, reluctant consent. Riven carried the girl inside. She barely weighed anything, less than the guilt he would have carried if he'd left her. Inside, he wrapped her in the second blanket, gave her sips of water. Her name was Ellie. She'd wandered off during a hike with her uncle. Then rain, then trees, then panic. The rest was a blur of tears and thorns and running. Riven listened. Cale watched from the corner. When she finally slept, curled like a leaf by the fire, Riven sat beside Cale and whispered, You don't trust her? Cale's eyes didn't leave the flames. Not her. The people who'll come looking. The room chilled despite the fire. He was right. Helping meant being seen. Being seen meant being found. And being found meant "Will we run again?" Riven asked. Kael's silence wasn't cold this time. It was sorrow. They both stared into the fire, where a single ember broke loose and died in the dark. But the girl slept soundly, and outside the forest held its breath, waiting to see what they'd become. Dawn came slow, stretching gold through the trees like a reluctant promise. The girl, Ellie rubbed her eyes, still groggy, still unaware of the weight her presence carried in this hidden world. By the time the first search helicopter murmured far in the distance, Kael was already moving. There was no hesitation in his steps, no command given, just a shift in posture, the kind that meant, "We leave now." Riven packed what little they had. He offered Ellie a hand, and she clung to it, trusting. There were no questions, just tired eyes and scraped palms and the silent instinct that told her this strange boy and this quiet dog meant safety. They walked under shadowed pines, taking trails even deer had forgotten. Kael led with a kind of quiet intensity, always listening, always ahead. Not rushing, not reckless, but deliberate. An hour in, they saw the first search flag orange tape fluttering on a broken branch. Kael stopped. Riven did too. "This is where we part," Kael seemed to say with a glance. Ellie looked up at them. Her lip trembled. "I don't want to go alone." "You won't," Riven said, squeezing her hand. "There's people coming. Good ones." She looked at Kael, searching his eyes like she understood something ancient was behind them. He lowered his head, touched her hand with his nose. Gentle. Then he turned away. Riven knelt beside her. "Count to 30. Loud. Then yell for help." She nodded slowly. He waited for her to start counting, barely whispered at first, then louder, steadier, braver. 1, 2, 3. Riven stood. 4, 5. Kael was already moving into the woods. 6. Riven followed. They didn't look back. By the time Ellie's voice reached 20, the trees had swallowed them whole. And when the first shout-human, hopeful pierced the forest, Riven felt his chest tighten. He kept walking, but something had shifted. Not in the path, but in the silence. That night, as they camped far from the search zone, Riven sat across from Kael beneath a sky dusted with stars. The fire crackled between them, soft and low. "I get it now," Riven murmured. "Survival isn't enough." Kael looked up. "There has to be a reason, a direction." Kael's eyes stayed on him for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "Maybe there's still something left for dogs like us." The firelight flickered. Between them, the warmth wasn't just heat. It was redemption. And in the stillness of the woods, two shadows leaned closer to the flame, not as fugitives, but as something new, something becoming. It had rained in the night, not the hard, punishing kind, but the quiet kind, the kind that cleans the world without asking for anything in return. Now the forest breathed in mist and memory. Dew clung to every leaf, softening the colors into watercolor hues. The earth smelled rich, alive. Pines whispered, and the clouds above thinned like curtains slowly being pulled away from the morning. Kael stood still beneath the cedar, letting the drops fall from the needles above him. His fur was damp, his eyes soft. This was not a battlefield, not a hiding place. Just morning. Ahead, Riven chased a squirrel through a patch of ferns. His feet were quick, his movements loose, free. The awkwardness he once wore like second skin had faded. His laugh, sharp and short, echoed between the trees. Almost gotcha, he shouted. The squirrel darted up a trunk and vanished into the canopy. Riven stopped, breathing hard, then spun around and grinned toward Kyle. Kyle didn't move, but something shifted in his posture. Ears relaxed, head tilted, approval. Riven jogged back, boots muddy, hair plastered from the mist. "I didn't catch him," he said between breaths, "but I almost did." Kale blinked slowly. "You ran like you weren't afraid," and in that silence, Riven seemed to hear it. "I wasn't," he whispered. He dropped beside Kale, back against the same cedar. The two of them sat in the hush, listening to the drops fall, not speaking, not needing to. For the first time in a long time, nothing hunted them. No voice called out commands. No trap waited beneath the leaves. The world just was. Kyle watched a bead of water slide down a strand of pine, then fall quietly, simply to the soil. He closed his eyes. Riven leaned back, arms behind his head. "Do you think," he said slowly, "this is what normal feels like?" Kyle didn't answer, but he didn't look away. And maybe that was answer enough. The trail curved uphill beneath the whispering limbs of alder trees. Morning light slanted through the canopy, casting slow-moving patterns across the earth. Riven walked ahead now, shoulders steady, eyes forward, each step quiet, measured, intentional. Kale followed a few paces behind, but not because he needed to, because he chose to, because Riven no longer needed to be led. The path wound upward, and with each crunch of gravel underfoot, Riven's thoughts wandered not aimlessly, but like a river, finding the shape of its banks. I used to think survival meant hiding. He remembered the night in the hollow tree, shivering beneath wet bark, too afraid to breathe. I thought being safe meant being small, invisible, forgettable. He touched the scar just under his collarbone, the one from the storm-splintered branch that Kyle had helped bind. The memory flickered like firelight. He'd learned how to feel the air for signs before sound came, learned how the forest breathed, and how silence didn't always mean safety. He remembered Kyle's voice in the dark, low, and certain. Stillness can be a warning, too. He'd learned trust wasn't built with words, that Kale spoke more in the way he circled back at dusk or stood between Riven and the unknown, in the way he didn't flinch when thunder cracked overhead, but looked back, making sure Riven hadn't. He remembered the river, the pull of it, cold and merciless, the moment he slipped under, and the flash of Kale's teeth pulling him out. "Don't fight the current," Kale had said. "Flow with it, then choose your edge." Riven stepped over a half-buried root. His eyes scanned automatically for snare lines, for unnatural breaks in the brush, for the scent of rusted metal. Kyle had taught him that too. Not how to run from fear, but how to look it in the eye and measure it. How to decide if it was worth backing down from. What have I learned? That trust isn't a warm word. It's a scar that closes clean, a night you survived together, a silence where no one left. That some dogs speak with their presence. That you don't have to be fearless. You just have to stop letting fear steer you. A bird flapped up from the underbrush. Riven didn't flinch. He just breathed. Behind him, Kale stopped for a moment, watching, evaluating, and then he followed again. Riven's pace didn't change. For the first time he was leading without needing permission, not because he wanted to be brave, but because he finally believed he was. The sky broke open in hues of rose and ember as they climbed the final stretch of the ridge. The earth beneath them was soft with moss, damp from the night's final rain, and the wind carried a scent of pine and thawing ground, like something old giving way to something quietly becoming. Riven stepped up first. His paws sank slightly into the mud before finding rock, then earth again. He hesitated at the crest, blinking into the golden swell of morning. And then he saw it. A wide valley stretched beneath them like an open hand cradled in green, rimmed in light, unmarked by roads or fences. A place untouched, unnamed, alive. Cale reached the ridge seconds later, his breath steady, ears high, body still limping faintly from the healing wound. He stood beside Riven without a word. For a long moment neither moved. They simply stood there. Two silhouettes cast long shadows on the rise behind them. "Is this it?" Riven asked softly. His voice didn't tremble. Cale didn't answer right away. He sat back on his haunches, eyes narrowed against the rising sun, watching birds break from the tree line in slow arcs. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, "It could be." The valley shimmered below, peaceful but not fragile. There were dangers here, there always would be, but it wasn't about what waited, it was about what they brought. Cale turned to Riven, his gaze steady. "You're ready." Riven looked away, not because he doubted, but because those words felt too big to wear all at once. He pawed the earth, then met Cale's eyes and said simply, "Not without you." A stillness fell between them, not silence, but something deeper, a recognition, a choice. Cale's body didn't shift much, but his mouth, usually still and watchful, curved softly, barely. But it was there, a smile. "Then let's keep walking." And they did. Together, they stepped forward, the light stretching before them. The ridge fell away behind them. No leashes, no commands, no chains. Just two dogs, one learning, one healing, both walking toward a world that might still have room for loyalty, for instinct, for second chances. Their shadows stretched beside them, side by side, and as the sun climbed higher, they walked straight into the light. In the quiet bond between Cale and Riven, we are reminded of the silent power of loyalty, trust, and second chances. This story is not just about survival in the wild, it's about rediscovering purpose, choosing kindness in a world that often forgets it, and healing together, step by step. German Shepherds, like Cale, embody the very best of what animals can teach us: resilience, devotion, and an unwavering instinct to protect. They ask for little only our trust, and give everything in return. Let this tale be a gentle reminder that love doesn't need words. Sometimes it walks beside us in paw prints. Sometimes it saves us when we don't even realize we're lost. In a world filled with noise, there is wisdom in the silence between friends. May we carry the message forward, to care deeply, to protect the vulnerable, to walk bravely into the light, together, and above all, to never underestimate the heart of a dog.